Last year was the beginning of something I can't shake. Something that feels stitched into my very being, like a parasite that refuses to let go. It was a Wednesday night when this all began. A night my friends and I decided to ruin the midweek monotony. We didn't need an excuse, not really. We got our hands on some weed, a few packs of cheap beer, and headed for the railway tracks near our dorms. It was the spot where people went to let loose. My name's Lucas, by the way. Not that it matters much. I was always the quiet one, the observer. But that night, I felt a kind of excitement stirring inside me. Or maybe it was something darker. On the way to the tracks, my gut twisted in ways I couldn't explain. A voice at the back of my mind whispered, "Don't go." I shrugged it off, chalking it up to nerves. This was my first time trying weed. After all, maybe paranoia was a side effect I didn't know about yet. My friends, Jake, Brandon, Ashley, and Emma, were already halfway through their beers by the time we got there. They were laughing and teasing each other, the cold biting at our cheeks, but we didn't care. We reached the clearing, a space surrounded by trees, with a few large rocks scattered around. We settled in, passing around the joint and taking swigs of beer. That's when I first heard it. A twig snapped somewhere in the darkness. My head shot up, scanning the shadows beyond the firelight. "You hear that?" I asked. Jake smirked. "Relax, man. First time." "Huh? You're gonna get paranoid." "It's normal." Maybe he was right. But the feeling of being watched didn't go away. If anything, it grew stronger. After a few more minutes, I heard shuffling in the bushes. The clearing wasn't big, a circular area with rocks in the center and dense foliage all around. It felt like the woods were breathing, alive with something unseen. "Did anyone else hear that?" I whispered. Brandon nodded, his face tense. "Yeah, definitely heard something that time." Ashley rolled her eyes. "You two are just hyping each other up. Nothing's out there." Before she could finish, a voice, low, raspy, almost inhuman, cut through the air. "Are you sure?" The words were like claws scraping against my sanity. We froze, our eyes darting to one another in silent confirmation. None of us could have made that sound. The voice was too raw, too alien, to belong to any college student playing a prank. Then came the laugh. It was guttural and sinister, more of a growl than a human sound. My chest tightened as the bushes rustled again. Without a word, we bolted. We ran faster than we ever had, our footsteps pounding against the frozen earth. The 5-minute walk back to the dorms turned into a frantic 1-minute sprint. By the time we reached the safety of the main building, I was gasping for air, my mind racing with questions I didn't want to ask aloud. But it wasn't over. Not even close. Later that night, around 2 a.m., I had to head back to my off-campus apartment. The bus wasn't running, so I had no choice but to walk the 25 minutes in the freezing cold. The dorms were too cramped, and I needed my space, or so I convinced myself. Deep down, I didn't want to admit how terrified I was to be alone. The moment I stepped outside, that same gut-wrenching dread returned. It wrapped around me like a noose, tightening with each step I took away from the dorms. I kept telling myself it was nothing. "You're just paranoid. It's all in your head." 5 minutes into the walk, I felt it. The distinct sensation of being watched. My skin prickled, every instinct screaming at me to turn around. When I did, the street behind me was empty. The streetlights cast long, eerie shadows, but there was no one there. I kept walking, my pace quickening with every glance over my shoulder. Every 30 seconds, I turned around, half expecting to see something lurking in the darkness. But the street stayed empty, silent, until it wasn't. With 5 minutes left to my apartment, the bushes to my right rustled. My heart jumped into my throat. I froze, staring into the tangled mass of branches. The shadows shifted, but nothing stepped forward. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. Then that laugh. The same guttural, rasping laugh from the woods. It cut through the silence like a knife, freezing me in place. I ran. I didn't think. I didn't breathe. I just ran. The main office of my apartment complex was just ahead, the faint glow of the security lights beckoning me like a lighthouse in a storm. When I reached it, I collapsed against the glass doors, gasping for air. A security guard, Officer Daniels, was sitting inside. He opened the door, his expression a mix of concern and curiosity. "You okay, kid? What happened?" I didn't want to tell him. It sounded insane, even to me. But something in his eyes, the way they darted to the shadows outside, made me spill everything. When I finished, he nodded slowly. "You're not the first. 3 other people have told me about that laugh. Always in the same spot." My stomach churned. "What is it?" He shook his head. "No one knows. But if I were you, I'd stick to the bus from now on. And don't walk alone at night." I nodded, though the words barely registered. My mind was still in the bushes, still hearing that voice. "Are you sure?" That night, I barely slept. My apartment felt suffocating, every shadow stretching into monstrous forms. The events of the evening replayed in my mind like a broken record. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that voice again, rasping and cruel. "Are you sure?" Around 4:36 a.m., I woke up in a cold sweat. It wasn't the kind of waking where you stirred gently, stretching under warm blankets. No, this was violent, like surfacing from a nightmare too real to dismiss. My throat was dry, my chest tight. And then, I heard it again. The laugh. It echoed softly at first, coming from somewhere beyond my window. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, staring into the darkness of my room. The sound grew louder, closer. My hands trembled as I reached for the baseball bat I kept by the nightstand. My breath caught in my throat when I saw it. A shadow moving across the wall, its form unnatural, disjointed. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. The thing, whatever it was, crept closer, and I swear I felt its breath on my skin. And then, it spoke. "I know you're awake, Lucas," it rasped, the voice dripping with malice. "I've been watching, and I'm not done with you." I don't remember much after that. I must have passed out, because the next thing I knew, the sun was streaming through the blinds. The shadow was gone, but the dread lingered, settling into my bones like a permanent weight. For the next few days, I tried to go about my life as usual. Finals week was approaching, and I threw myself into studying, hoping to drown out the memories of that night. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Jake, Brandon, Ashley, and Emma didn't bring it up, either. It was as if we had silently agreed to pretend it never happened. But every so often, I'd catch one of them glancing over their shoulder or jumping at the sound of a twig snapping. We were all on edge, haunted by the same unspoken fear. One evening, I decided to confront it. Ignoring the pit of anxiety in my stomach, I called Jake and Brandon. "We need to go back," I said, surprising even myself. "What?" Jake's voice cracked. "Why the hell would we do that?" "Because it's not going to stop until we do," I replied, though I wasn't sure if I even believed it. "Whatever this thing is, it's not going to leave us alone unless we face it." There was a long pause. Finally, Brandon sighed. "All right, but we're bringing flashlights. And weapons." That night, we returned to the clearing. It felt smaller than I remembered, the trees looming over us like silent sentinels. The air was heavy, filled with a silence so thick it pressed against my eardrums. We formed a circle, clutching our flashlights and makeshift weapons, a crowbar, a pocket knife, the same baseball bat I'd held in my apartment. "You're sure about this?" Brandon asked, his voice trembling. I nodded, though my stomach churned with doubt. "We have to know." For a while, nothing happened. The only sounds were the rustling of leaves and our own ragged breathing. But just as we began to relax, the temperature plummeted. My breath fogged in front of me, and I saw Jake's hand tremble as he tightened his grip on the crowbar. Then, it came. The laugh, guttural and echoing, surrounded us. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. We whipped our flashlights around, illuminating nothing but trees and shadows. "Show yourself," I shouted, my voice cracking. The laugh stopped. In its place came a voice, soft and mocking. "You called, Lucas. Here I am." The shadows in front of us shifted, coalescing into a form. It was tall, hunched, and wrong. Its limbs too long, its eyes glowing faintly like embers. None of us moved, paralyzed by fear as the creature's gaze settled on me. "You've been fun," it hissed. "But now it's time to play a different game." Time seemed to stop as the creature's words hung in the frigid air. The glow of its ember-like eyes pierced the darkness, locking me in place. My grip on the baseball bat tightened, but my hands were slick with sweat, and my pulse roared in my ears. Jake and Brandon were equally frozen, their faces pale and stricken with terror. The creature tilted its head as if amused by our fear. It moved forward slowly, its elongated limbs creaking like ancient branches. With every step it took, the ground beneath us seemed to shiver. Its voice rasped again, dripping with malice. "You've danced on the edge of my world, Lucas. Now, I'll drag you into mine." The flashlight in Brandon's trembling hand flickered, casting erratic shadows that made the creature's movements even more grotesque. I had to do something. Anything. "Get back," I yelled, swinging the bat wildly. The effort was useless. The creature didn't even flinch. Instead, it leaned forward, its face inches from mine. "You think you can fight me?" it whispered, its voice now so low it felt like it was crawling inside my skull. "You belong to me now." And then, it lunged. I didn't have time to think. My instincts kicked in, and I swung the bat again, this time connecting with the creature's arm. The sound was sickening, like hitting wet wood. It recoiled slightly, but its laughter only grew louder, more mocking. Jake snapped out of his paralysis and hurled the crowbar, aiming for its head. The creature dodged with inhuman speed, its movements a blur. Brandon shouted something unintelligible, brandishing the flashlight like a weapon, but the creature's focus was solely on me. I stepped back, my mind racing. "Why me?" I shouted, desperation seeping into my voice. "What do you want from me?" Its laughter stopped abruptly, and for a moment, there was silence. Then it spoke, its voice low and filled with cruel delight. "You called me. You opened the door. Now, you'll see what's on the other side." Suddenly, the ground beneath us began to quake. The clearing warped, the trees twisting unnaturally as if pulled by some unseen force. A cold wind whipped through the air, carrying whispers that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The creature raised one elongated arm, pointing at me with a crooked finger. Jake grabbed my arm, shouting, "We need to go. Now." But before we could move, the earth split open beneath my feet. Darkness surged up like a living thing, cold and suffocating. I felt myself being pulled down, the creature's laughter echoing in my ears. Brandon and Jake reached for me, their hands slipping against mine as the force dragged me deeper. "Hold on," Jake screamed, his face contorted with panic. But it was no use. The darkness consumed me. When I came to, I was somewhere else. The air was thick and oppressive, filled with the stench of decay. I stood on a barren landscape, the ground cracked and lifeless. The sky above was a swirling mass of gray and black, punctuated by flashes of crimson lightning. The whispers were louder here, a cacophony of voices speaking in a language I couldn't understand. And then I saw it. The creature was standing a few feet away, its form more defined now. Its limbs were grotesquely elongated, its skin pale and stretched tight over jagged bones. Its eyes burned brighter, and its mouth twisted into a grin that revealed rows of jagged teeth. "Welcome to my domain," it said, spreading its arms as if to show off the desolation around us. "This is where you'll stay." I wanted to scream, to run, but there was nowhere to go. The ground seemed to shift under my feet, and the air itself felt like it was pressing down on me. The creature began to circle me, its laughter reverberating in the emptiness. "You're not the first to come here, Lucas," it hissed, "and you won't be the last. But you're special. You fought back. That makes this more fun." It lunged at me again, but this time, I was ready. I raised the bat, swinging with all my strength. The moment it connected, there was a blinding flash of light. The creature screamed, a sound so shrill and otherworldly that it made my ears bleed. The light expanded, consuming everything around me. When I opened my eyes, I was lying on the floor of the clearing. The sun was rising, its golden light cutting through the trees. Jake and Brandon were beside me, their faces pale and streaked with tears. "Lucas," Jake exclaimed, shaking me. "You're back. We thought we lost you." I sat up slowly, my body aching as if I'd run a marathon. The clearing was eerily quiet, the oppressive atmosphere gone. The creature was nowhere to be seen. "What happened?" Brandon asked, his voice trembling. I didn't know how to answer. The memories of that other place were already fading, like a nightmare slipping away upon waking. All I knew was that we had survived. Somehow, as we stumbled back to campus, none of us spoke. There was nothing to say. The events of that night would remain with us forever, unspoken but always present. And though the creature was gone, I could still feel its eyes on me, watching, waiting. Months later, I transferred to another school, far away from the town where it all happened. I've tried to move on, to forget, but some nights, I wake up at 4:36 a.m., my room filled with the sound of laughter. I don't think it's over. I don't think it ever will be.